President-elect Donald Trump's immigration policy sparking debate across the nation, including here in Maryland.
And if people are deported, we will be having to provide services to the families.
Local leaders pushing back on the idea of mass deportations, while law enforcement leaders claim that's putting politics over public safety.
That's all it is politics.
And federal funding for the state could be at risk.
The federal funding will ultimately dry up.
I'm going in depth on the issue, pressing leaders on both sides of the debate on where they stand.
Does that mean that BPD will honor ICE detainers?
And the best way for Maryland to move forward. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. I'm Mackenzie Frost. President-elect Donald Trump's plan for immigration and his incoming border czar, Tom Homan, is doubling down on the administration's immigration policy ahead of the inauguration. That includes a plan for mass deportations. Just this week, Homan calling on Democratic lawmakers in Chicago to cooperate with the plan to remove what he calls public safety threats. Chicago is one of many Democratic-led cities and states pushing back on the immigration plan that includes jurisdictions here in Maryland. Baltimore City Mayor Brandon Scott, the latest leader to weigh in, but others, including many top cops in the area and the state, are throwing their support behind the president-elect. Let's take a closer look at the debate on the national and local levels.
Please welcome President-elect Donald J. Trump.
President-elect Donald Trump has not shied away from his immigration policy plans, making it a cornerstone of his campaign, Trump doubling down after winning the 2024 election.
But we're starting with the criminals, and we got to do it.
What's being described as mass deportation of people in the United States illegally, the incoming president says people with criminal records will be deported first.
We have convicted murders. We don't mean people that are even on trial. We have people that have murdered numerous people are on our streets and in our farms, and we have to get them out of our country.
These ideas resonating with Republicans on Capitol Hill. Senator Lindsey Graham just this week calling the broken immigration system a ticking time bomb for national security, adding that what Trump wants will happen in Congress.
So yes, the Republican Party will pass as its top priority border security, more bed spaces so you don't have to release people that shouldn't be released, and more ICE agents to deport people who represent a threat to our country and shouldn't be here to begin with. We're going to do that.
In Maryland, leaders are pushing back already. Governor Wes Moore, the Democrat, coming out just days after the November election.
Marylanders are worried about what this election is going to mean for themselves and their families and their future.
Governor Moore even spending $190,000 in tax dollars to hire a consulting firm to prepare for the incoming Trump administration. Local leaders quick to follow. Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman.
And we will do everything that we can to make sure that people have legal representation and that people have services. And if people are deported, we will be having to provide services to the families when the breadwinner leaves.
Baltimore City Mayor Brandon Scott.
We know that we are looking at challenges in the years ahead.
And the mayor of Frederick banning cooperation with federal ICE officials, vowing to use tax dollars to help foot the bill for people facing deportation.
Ensuring they have the legal support they need to stand strong and remain in this community they have chosen to call home.
You're listening to the TJ Smith Podcast.
The resistance stretches beyond political offices.
Pleased to be joined in studio by Commissioner Rich Worley.
Baltimore City Police Commissioner Richard Worley says his department will not cooperate with ICE either.
The mayor's made that pretty clear that we're going to continue as we are now. We're not going to notify.
One day later, Mayor Scott on the radio says the city will work with any partner to remove criminals from the community. So Thursday,
It is a great pleasure for me to be here.
we questioned the mayor about the apparent difference.
Does that mean that BPD will honor ICE detainers?
I don't care if you're from England, if you're from Baltimore, if you're from DC, if you're from Canada, if you're from Russia. If you're from Baltimore County, Howard County, Texas, Florida, if you come to Baltimore and commit a crime, our law enforcement folks will be working to remove you and working with all our federal partners when necessary to have you taken out of the city of Baltimore. Full stop. There's nothing else that needs to be explained about that.
So does that, I guess the confusion is we heard Commissioner Worley say no.
I knew you were going to have a follow-up. But I'm the mayor, and I said what I said, and everyone does what I say.
Have you told him that?
I said what I said, and that's what's going to happen.
Well, that's all it is politics.
Maryland's ICE Director Matthew Elliston says politics should not play a role in public safety, and he believes that's what the mayor is doing right now.
There's no public safety spin that you can try to put on, not, helping us arrest gang members.
While the Trump team and his supporters don't seem to be backing down from his mass deportation plans, the impacts on the economy could be significant. A recent Brookings Institution study estimates Trump's plan could reduce 2025's GDP growth in the country by $30 to $110 billion. In Maryland, nearly 17% of the state's population in 2022 were immigrants. That's a larger share of the population than our neighboring states in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and above the national average. According to a report from the state comptroller, immigrants make up 21% of the state's labor force. While more than half of Maryland's immigrants were naturalized citizens in 2021, 36% of the unnaturalized immigrants are undocumented. We asked Governor Moore what his guidance has been to local leaders heading into the Trump administration and if he's concerned about Maryland's federal funding being impacted by a lack of cooperation with the immigration plans. In a statement, Governor Moore says he comes from a family of immigrants and says Congress needs to fix the broken immigration system. While not directly answering our funding questions, he says he has an obligation to protect Marylanders, including members of our immigrant communities, and he will wait to see what actions the new administration takes on immigration policy. As for guidance, he says his directives are clear. Deliver for Marylanders, defend constitutional rights, grow our economy, and restore faith in public servants, institutions, and democracy. While many details about how President-elect Trump will implement his plans are unclear, his allies on the Hill have a clear message for Democrats.
And to my Democratic friends, I think if you resist rational deportation policy, you do so at your own peril.
Joining us now is Harford County Sheriff Jeff Gaylor. Sheriff Gaylor, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, Mackenzie. Thanks for having me in.
So I know Harford County works with federal partners in terms of ICE detainers. Can you just explain why you believe that's important?
Absolutely. This is something I ran on. It's a public safety. You heard it during the piece. It's a public safety matter. It shouldn't be in politics. To find people who are in our communities committing criminal acts against the citizens who live there, who are found to be in the country, having entered the country illegally or overstayed a visa, they shouldn't, me as the sheriff, shouldn't have to open the door and let them right back out into our county to reoffend. And those are reported in Harford County. They're reported to ICE, and if ICE determines it, then they're marked for deportation.
And so you've been to the border, you've seen what's happening at the southern border. What are you looking for in the next Trump administration in terms of policy or plans?
Well, first and foremost, we're looking for the plan. Everyone keeps saying, do you support the president's plan? And I haven't seen a plan yet. I support working with our federal partners and particularly law enforcement on keeping our citizens safe. And that's what we've been doing in Harford County with our 287G partnership with ICE. And we plan to continue it, one of 3 in the state. And as far as I believe, all the counties should be jurisdictions that participate for the sake of their citizens, again, on not letting offenders back out into the community to reoffend. It's as simple as that. It's public safety 101.
Well, and that brings me to my next question, Sheriff Gaylor. Right now, there is not a statewide policy plan in place. Do you think that that should happen moving forward if there are concerns about a patchwork of immigration plans?
Yeah, and you heard it from the mayor in Baltimore. One day he's saying one thing, another he's saying something else. It's as simple as there should be cooperation. We should have learned this after 9/11, cooperation between law enforcement organizations at all levels, state, local, federal. And that's, the other day I heard him on the radio saying something different. He's changed his tune. All 24 jurisdictions should be cooperating with our federal ICE partners and taking those criminal offenders, particularly out of the system, out of our communities, and putting them, returning them to the countries that they came from before they came here illegally. And in our county, sadly, we saw the dramatic impact, not just with the opioid epidemic, but with Rachel Morin and Kayla Hamilton, two women whose lives were taken from them at the hands of illegal immigrants here, not coming to make our country better, but coming to commit crimes against our citizens.
And when it comes to what's happening in Harford County, without a clear plan across the state, do you believe that that what's happening in Harford County could be hindered if other jurisdictions are doing one thing, we have one county doing this, and not everyone is on the same page?
I don't think it's going to be hindered in Harford County. You know, we are recognized as being not a sanctuary jurisdiction as the rest of the state has tried to be, and unfortunately our legislature has pointed us in that direction. Hopefully, again, I think all 24 jurisdictions should cooperate with our federal partners and should get on the same page. It's not going to hinder our operations in Harford County. We're going to continue to work with all of our state, local, and federal partners to keep our citizens safe. And that's my responsibility, the oath I took to be the sheriff of Harford County, to protect the citizens I serve.
What do you say to critics of this who argue that, you know, the immigrant community is being unfairly targeted by this conversation and by these proposals that we're hearing come from the federal government?
I think that's the political end of it. Again, that's not the public safety end of it. That's the political end, trying to sell a narrative. Again, we've seen the results of an open border, of not enforcing our immigration policy, not forcing people to come into the country the proper way through the ports of entry, to be properly screened, to see what the purpose is. And again, we're a great country, you know, a melting pot of a whole lot of different cultures and peoples, but there's a process, there should be a process, a workable process that works. The federal system needs to work that out, but not to allow criminals to come in and offend, and that's what we're under right now.
All right, Harford County Sheriff Jeff Gaylor, thank you so much for your time this evening and coming in to talk about this.
Thank you for having me in.
So as we mentioned, Frederick Mayor Michael O'Connor was pushing back too, announcing several local initiatives to offset President-elect's mass deportation proposals. That includes the plan to create a legal advocacy fund, which would use taxpayer dollars to help non-citizens' legal fees as they fight deportation. Frederick County Sheriff Jenkins taking issue with that, saying it's a misuse of public funds and it puts public safety at risk.
I think by the mayor saying what he said, it's basically saying, you come to Frederick County, if you're in the country illegally, potentially a criminal, we're going to protect you.
The sheriff, Charles Jenkins, joins us live now to talk about this. Thank you for participating in this conversation.
Thank you.
I want to ask you about the mayor's plan just a little bit more. Do you believe that this is an appropriate use of tax dollars, given the conversations we're having with federal immigration proposal and policy ideas?
No, I don't. He's absolutely wrong on this issue on all sides of it. He has no right to basically allocate taxpayers' funds to protect people in this country illegally to pay their legal expense. That's totally, absolutely wrong. The other side of this is his statements almost invite potentially criminal elements into Frederick City, which are in Frederick County, and he's also on the wrong side of that. So I think his statements put our citizens at risk, potentially.
So how do you plan to work with this? If this is the message that we're hearing from the Frederick City mayor and we're hearing your proposals and your opposition to this, how do you square this? What's going to happen in Frederick County?
Well, nothing's really going to happen any differently. So first of all, the mayor's statement, he basically wants to make Frederick City a sanctuary city. That's not going to happen as long as our agency continues to work with ICE, as we have for 16 years in the 287G jail-based program. It's been very effective. The city police officers, when they make arrests, they come to our jail. We screen the arrestees, and we determine whether or not they're in the country illegally. Then we take the appropriate steps, working with ICE, to place them into deportation. Again, it changes nothing that we do.
Do you believe that the governor should step in here and have some sort of statewide policy about what local jurisdictions are allowed to do when it comes to cooperating with ICE?
I believe that the governor should allow local law enforcement statewide, or at least urge local law enforcement statewide to cooperate with ICE by any means they can, give them any support they can, because the president and Mr. Homan has made clear the targets are criminal gangs, they're criminals that are in jail, they are individuals with deportation warrants that are currently existing. So I think this whole thing's being blown out of proportion. The governor should step back and say, listen, Homeland Security, come in and do your jobs. We won't impede, we won't interfere. We'll let you get the elements, the criminal elements off of our streets, because this is about protecting Americans and Marylanders.
There's been some conversation and concern about what federal funding and how that could be impacted if local jurisdictions are pushing back on the messaging that we're here at the federal level. Do you think that that should be the conversation? Should federal dollars be at play if local leaders will not cooperate?
Frankly, I think it should. I think it should be a real issue. I think that's the only way to leverage local and state governments to cooperate is to cut off the money.
All right, we'll see what happens. Obviously, this conversation is far from over. Frederick County Sheriff Charles Jenkins, thank you for your time this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we did invite Frederick Mayor Michael O'Connell to participate, but we did not hear back. We reached out to county executives and state's attorneys across Maryland asking if they're preparing to participate with any orders that may come from Washington or if they're preparing to direct their jurisdictions not to engage with ICE. A spokesperson with the Baltimore County government responding, saying the county continues to follow all existing policies and procedures. It goes on to say, quote, moving forward, we will continue to implement best practices to ensure that we do all we can to support and uplift our neighbors so that Baltimore County remains a welcoming place for all. The Howard County spokesperson says the county does not and has never honored ICE detainers, citing a sanctuary policy put in place in 2021. The Carroll County Commission says in part the Carroll County Sheriff, with the backing of the state's attorney, currently cooperates with ICE and will probably continue to do so. The statement says the sheriff has the support of the Carroll County Commissioners. And the Cecil County Executive Adam Strait responding, saying he stands with the majority of Cecil County citizens in supporting the county sheriff's position to assist and cooperate with federal law enforcement when it comes to those accused of breaking the law. All right, federal funding could determine whether Maryland counties comply with deportation efforts. We just talked a little bit about that. Still to come, we'll ask a lawmaker whether the state can afford to dissent with ICE. And as we head to break, let's take a look at some of today's top headlines.
Day or night in Baltimore City, crime rarely takes a break, and neither did the officers tasked with keeping you safe 24 hours a day. Right now, Baltimore's police force stretched thinner than ever before, facing a steady decline for the last 2 decades.
Going down every single year. Over the last 20 years, I think there's only been 1 year where we had an increase, and that was 1 officer. We actually hired one more.
On WBAL Radio, Commissioner Richard Worley revealing just how severe BPD's staffing crisis has become, saying citywide they're currently short 621 officers.
After a 4-day trial here inside federal court, a jury found 36-year-old Ryan Dales guilty of gun and drug charges, including possession with the intent to distribute fentanyl. The case stemming from a wire fraud and identity theft investigation headed by the Office of the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland, Eric Barron.
Governor Moore just announced a new grant with the Maryland Energy Administration, expanding the number of electric school buses, a program state officials say will help cut emissions that drive climate change and is better for the health of kids. Diego Lopez with the Maryland Energy Administration says,
we're getting so much demand. We have 6 school districts already looking into electrification. They're already on their way to full adoption of electric buses. So we're wanting to help those buses that are already taking those steps, but also help those underserved communities that might be left behind.
The MEA will offer up to $17 million for electric school buses, charging infrastructure, and other costs.
Can't hear you.
Hello, Congressman Harris, can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Okay.
Well, some local leaders are promising to fight the Trump administration's immigration policy. Some experts say local jurisdictions will not be able to ignore federal immigration law and stop ICE agents from removing immigrants. Retired Sergeant Betsy Smith with the National Police Association says a refusal to cooperate could put federal dollars at risk.
The federal funding will ultimately dry up, and they're going to be stuck supporting these massive amounts of illegal aliens, including the thousands that are criminals. And it's going to create an untenable situation for the leadership and for the communities.
Federal funding is critical for Maryland right now. The state already facing a multi-billion-dollar budget shortfall, and plans to rebuild the Key Bridge are on the line. Joining us now to talk more about those concerns, Maryland's only Republican representative in Congress, Andy Harris. Thank you so much for being here, Congressman.
It's good to be with you.
So have you had any recent conversations with the president-elect or anyone from his transition team about this immigration plan?
Absolutely. We've been in touch with his deputy chief of staff. The bottom line is that this is clear. If states are not willing to keep up their end of the bargain with their constitutional end of the bargain, which is that federal immigration law, that's the law of the land, you're not willing to cooperate with us, well, then maybe you don't need the education dollars, the road dollars, all the other dollars that flow from the federal government. And I believe they are putting all of that at risk by not agreeing to again, we're not going to deport the 1.2 million people who have deportation orders against them, who have gone through the federal adjudication system on immigration, have found to be in violation of the law in this country. They're not going to agree for federal agents to enforce federal law. Well, then they might just have to be on their own for everything else, too.
So with this conversation happening about federal dollars on the line, I mean, do you believe that this could be just, some rhetoric that we're hearing from the president-elect and his team to try and encourage these local leaders to get in line and to follow these orders? Or do you really believe that these federal dollars will be cut off?
I absolutely believe that they will begin to cut off federal dollars to any jurisdiction that is unwilling to do what the Constitution says they're supposed to do. They are supposed to allow the federal government to enforce immigration law. And again, we have between 1.2 and 1.4 million illegal aliens in this country with deportation orders. That is, they've gone before an immigration judge. The immigration judge has found they're here illegally. They need to be removed. And again, look, if these jurisdictions, again, they don't want the road dollars, they don't want the their justice system dollars, they don't want their education dollars, fine, do whatever you want, but you might be on your own for all that.
So we obviously have several leaders in the state saying they're not going to work with ICE. We have a mayor calling for the creation of a legal fund for people facing deportation. I want to ask you, you said in a previous interview that, quote, we should begin prosecuting those local officials because they are working contrary to federal law. Do you believe that anyone who is actively going against the order from the federal government should be prosecuted?
Yeah, if a local official actually impedes the enforcement of immigration law, federal law says they're actually guilty of a crime. Again, this deal was made 200 years ago, almost 250 years ago, where all immigration policy is ceded to the federal government. Look, if these people don't like it, it's great. Change the Constitution. But until then, you got to live within it.
So how would the prosecution effort work in terms of if they're actually impeding them? Would you see a mayor face charges for this in theory?
Yeah, I would guess the U.S. Marshals would be arresting people who are impeding, who are, again, violating federal law. The law is clear. A local official cannot impede the enforcement of federal laws. Now, they may, the question is, well, we're not just not going to cooperate. Are we actually going to stop them from doing this? Well, if they attempt to stop them from doing it, they should be prosecuted. Look, this election was all about whether or not we're going to protect our borders and the security of our citizens and their communities. And shame on these local elected officials. Again, look, if the people of Frederick City want to spend their dollars, on legal fees for illegal immigrants, they don't have these funds for legal people here, but you want to spend it on illegal people? Let's go to the polls and let's see what the people of Frederick say at the next election.
All right, Congressman Andy Harris, I appreciate your time. I don't think this conversation is over, so I look forward to more conversations about this as well.
Thank you.
So I reached out to the immigrant advocacy group CASA Maryland for a comment on the Trump administration's plan and the reaction it's getting here at home, but we did not hear back. This week, we asked if Maryland jurisdiction should be required to comply with ICE. We'll take a look at some of your responses after the break.
Here's tonight's primetime lineup on Fox 45. Brought to you locally by your McDonald's owner-operators.
This week we asked, should Maryland jurisdictions be required to comply with ICE? And we received hundreds of responses. Let's take a look at just some of them. Most everyone said yes, that jurisdictions should be required. Of course they should if they have a choice. Maryland does not have a choice, nor should they. We do have one person who says, in case of emergency, yes. Anything else, no. Yes, say it louder in Howard County only. We talk about federal government and federal funding. Dave says Maryland should comply if they want federal funding. All right, so that's it for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. I'm Mackenzie Frost.